Hi, everyone, and welcome to the May Strategy MVP Advisory Council webinar. We are going to let people kind of trickle in, but we are going to go ahead and get started. Just a couple housekeeping slides. So our next webinar is going to be on June 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So kind of do the calculation to see when it fits into your time zone. Just a reminder, spread the word. Anyone can attend the SMAC webinars or speak during them on any topic of choice. We just invite you to email us at smac@sitecore.com, email address right there on the screen with any suggestions. And as mentioned, we're also looking at doing another September and November webinar as well. Please invite friends, coworkers, colleagues. And with that, I'm going to let you know who our speakers are. So first up, we have Christine Bookless. Second, following her would be Colin Macintosh, and then following him, which will be a new face to the group today, is Dr. Michelle Channing. So with that, I'm going to let Christine kick off.
Excellent, amazing. So hi everyone, and I do apologise, my camera on my laptop is broken, which is why you can't see my face today, so I'm not intentionally being rude. So essentially what I'm going to be looking at and talking to you guys about today is sort of sustainability. So it's something that's kind of massive with a lot of our clients, and obviously a lot of companies more and more sort of kind of incorporating sustainability and kind of thinking around that into their strategic objectives. So what I'm going to take you guys through today is some specific examples of how we've kind of been working with a client recently, and where we've used how we've used certain Sitecore technologies to kind of support with the reduction of their environmental impact. So yep, I took that picture literally just before I came on the call, so that's me. My name's Christine, for those who I haven't met before. So I'm a lead Sitecore Optimisation Consultant here at Sagittarius. And essentially, in no way, shape or form would I call myself an expert when it comes to anything to do with kind of sustainability. It's just something that personally I'm quite passionate about, and also a lot of my clients, and then even here at Sagittarius, are kind of working towards obtaining like B Corp accreditation. So it's something that we're kind of starting to incorporate a lot more into our thinking, how we're working with clients, and the actual work that we're doing as well. So just to kind of tee things up, so this is a kind of shot of the COP26 conference, which was actually in my hometown of Glasgow. So essentially, what's really driving this forward, particularly for a lot more companies and organisations now, is the kind of 2030 agenda for sustainable development. So it's essentially something that's been adopted by all UN members since 2015, actually. And essentially what it is it's centred around giving a blueprint for kind of peace, prosperity, people and the planet. And then specifically around the kind of Paris Agreement as well. Kind of the global goal is to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius. So I think everyone has a part to play in that when it comes to saving the planet. So at the heart of the kind of the UN's initiatives, they've defined 17 sustainable development goals. And essentially these are an urgent call for action, but for all countries, that's both developed and developing. And it's about recognising multiple different factors around kind of ending poverty and other deprivations, like things like improving health, education, reducing inequality, and then as well the kind of key thing, and this is kind of what I'm going to be looking at with you guys today, but it's around kind of tackling climate change and then working to kind of preserve our planet, basically. So yeah, number 13 out of these sustainable development goals, and that's the one that's kind of centred around climate action, which is kind of quite specific to some of the examples that I'm going to kind of be taking you guys through today. Yeah, so in terms of ESG goals, what that kind of means is environmental, social and corporate governance. So those are the kind of 3 key pillars of a modern and all-inclusive framework. And this actually is really great when you are kind of trying to improve within a business your kind of ESG factors, and it helps understand how you're kind of managing risks. And then it helps identify any opportunities kind of related to the three criteria. So essentially environmental. So how is the company improving and protecting the environment? Social being, so today's companies must be responsible for their overall impact in the social fabric. And then governance as well. So are organisations behaving ethically, and do their actions kind of match their policies as well? So effective ESG requires sort of outcomes and accountability. So it's really important to kind of set and measure each of your different goals. And then without these goals and policies, companies that actually, especially the larger corporations, can be at risk. And what can actually happen is the investors damage reputation, and then some can even see fines as well for violating sort of environmental regulations. So that's sort of at the kind of globally corporate large organisation scale, and then kind of smaller to medium businesses can have their own targets and things that they need to meet as well. So outside of the actual kind of loss of investment or fines or anything like that, ultimately it's a kind of responsibility to make the world a better place, I suppose. So the specific client that I've been working with recently, so essentially they are within the public sector. They specialise within kind of education space, local authority, governments, and whatnot. And there's kind of two elements to what the client does. So they have like an e-commerce side of the website. They sell like educational school supplies, office supplies into the public sector. And then they also offer procurement services. So for schools that would want to kind of procure like a new catering company for the school dinners, for example. So they've got a massive social value and sustainability initiative. And I love working with this client because they're actually owned by local authorities. And essentially they do a lot around kind of contributing back into the community. They source kind of local and sustainable suppliers for all of their kind of supplies and products. And then they also have like a loyalty scheme where it's if you spend money, you get money off vouchers back, and essentially that's kind of giving money back into the public sector. So social value and sustainability is a massive thing for them at the moment. And we actually kind of about 6 or so months ago ran a workshop with them, and a lot of what they were kind of focusing on and talking about was social value and sustainability around how can they get the message out there around what it is that they're actually doing. It was all within like a marketing angle, but actually where they weren't really thinking was the technology side of it. So that's something that we've actually kind of highlighted to them, identified, and now we're kind of working really closely with them to kind of look at the technology side of sustainability. So when it comes to digital advertising campaigns, so you might not actually realise how much power goes into placing targeting ads that people see online every day. So for many people, there's a hidden impact of digital advertising, which kind of might come as a surprise, but it actually has a massive carbon footprint. And then on average, a digital ad campaign will emit over 5.4 tonnes of CO2. And that's half of one consumer's annual emissions in the UK. So WPP recently actually estimated that 55% of their current carbon emissions are actually coming from the programmatic supply chain that's delivering campaigns on behalf of their clients. So when you think of that, how big WPP is, and the fact that over half of their current carbon emissions actually just come from programmatic ads alone. So it's insane. So in terms of the digital ads, the kind of figures that I've just shared before are kind of a combination of the kind of full end-to-end process of a digital campaign. So that's the actual production of the ad creatives. So that could even be videos, equipment, like traveling, programmatic ad transactions as well. So the kind of automated buying and selling of online advertising space. And this one actually does play a big role in the production of the carbon emissions. Then as well, ad targeting and measurement. So selection of audience segments, uploading segments to the platform, continuous tracking of ad performance by multiple scripts on websites, and then the actual delivery of the adverts to your digital devices as well. So essentially there's a lot that kind of goes into that, and it does have a massive kind of carbon footprint and kind of impact to the environment as well. So for the client in question, what we actually did is we did an audit on their kind of paid advertising, and it actually showed that they were retargeting users with adverts for products that they'd just purchased. So they were retargeting people who just purchased a packet of Post-it notes. So it's obviously really unlikely that you're going to kind of go back and buy another packet of Post-it notes if you've just bought them. So we've kind of estimated that there's around sort of between 500 and 600 adverts per month that aligned with that. And then when you do the calculations, that actually equates to 1.94 tonnes of CO2 over the course of 6 months. So essentially, not even just about the kind of media spend and the kind of wasted budget there, but it's actually kind of having a massive impact on the environment. And that's actually equal to kind of 5,000 miles driven within a car, or sort of 240,000 smartphones being charged. So quite significant when we kind of broke it down and dug into the kind of detail and the numbers. So what we actually did is we kind of started looking at utilising Sitecore CDP, and then in particular the kind of audience sync capabilities within Sitecore CDP. So it's actually it's a great kind of part of the platform, not just from, as I mentioned, kind of media spend and kind of driving efficiencies and savings there, but also essentially around being able to make sure that we're retargeting people in the right way, so that it's gets meaning behind it and it's not kind of wasted and emitting to kind of almost 2 tonnes of carbon emissions. So audience sync as part of CDP essentially lets you target by combining kind of multiple different touch points, clickstream data, behavioural, historical, and then offline data sources. So it actually kind of pulls together that 360 customer view, and by using that we were able to kind of identify the kind of retargeting and making sure that we weren't retargeting people who for products that they've just purchased when it's unlikely they're going to buy them again. So this has actually helped reduce media spend and optimise it as well. But in addition to that, we're kind of projecting that they'll save almost 2 tonnes of CO2 emissions over the next kind of 6 months by making sure that they're kind of retargeting in the right way, and reducing the volume of retargeting for users where it's really highly unlikely that they're actually even going to kind of come back and purchase that product. And then in addition to that, with the same client, we've been looking at sort of emails campaigns as well. So that was another big part of it. So to just kind of pull up some stats in terms of the impact that emails have in terms of the kind of CO2 emissions. So one short email is estimated at 0.3 grams of CO2. And then that can actually increase to up to 7 for sort of a bigger, longer version, one that has maybe more imagery, perhaps like videos, more content. So if you look at it in this side of things, and I know that I personally get probably, I don't even know, up to 20, 30 emails in a day, just like emails from sort of companies and brands that I don't even open, that I just kind of send straight to my junk box. So when you think about it in the kind of that scale of things, it is literally, it's mental. So with the client in question, we did an audit of their kind of marketing emails, and there's a wider project going on here around sort of customer data and CRM. Obviously, I alluded to that with CDP earlier. So looking at kind of moving them from, they've got 2 different CRMs and actually 3 different email platforms that they were using. And what we actually identified is when we kind of dug into the data of the kind of past year, is there was kind of circa 800 customers that were sitting across 2 databases, and they were actually receiving sort of duplicate emails. So they were getting 2 of the same email at the same time because their kind of profile was sat across the 2 different CRMs. And then in addition to that, there was about 300 plus, between 300 and 400 individuals receiving emails that were actually relevant to them. So one of the examples we found is that they were sending kind of offers on money off of like Post-it notes and arts and crafts material, but sending those emails to kind of head teachers of schools, when the head teacher of a school isn't going to be the one that actually kind of looks at the classroom supplies. So again, emails that were getting sent out that were kind of irrelevant to the people that were getting sent to. And then as well, there was just over 100 sort of dead email addresses where they were kind of sending emails out, but the addresses were kind of no longer active. So when we kind of calculated the impact on this, so there was kind of just over 1,900 kind of wasted emails being sent, essentially, with the duplication and them being sent to dead email addresses and people that they aren't really relevant for. So that came out at kind of just over 32 kilograms of CO2 emissions. And then in order to actually offset that, you would need to kind of plant 15 trees to kind of offset that impact. So what we actually did is we kind of migrated them over to Sitecore Send, so having kind of one centralized platform. So they went from 3 to kind of one email marketing platform. And then what we actually did is, in addition to the kind of customer data program and the cleansing of all of that data across the CRM, so the cleansing of data helped us kind of identify sort of duplicate records and dead email addresses and stuff like that. And then what we actually did is, in terms of setting up in Sitecore Send, we kind of segmented the lists in a meaningful way to make sure that when we were kind of sending out marketing emails, they're only being sent and targeted to sort of the specific audience and the right audience as well. So essentially, we're projected to save potentially 1 tonne of CO2 emissions from this over the next 6 months. So we've only kind of just recently went live with that, but those are kind of what we're projecting in terms of the reduction in CO2, which is excellent. And then if we look at the kind of content side of things as well, so obviously content is king, but the environmental impact that it actually has when you think about it around creation, management, storage, production, and when you consider as well that the average sort of e-commerce website has upwards of 500 products, and that's not even just products that are listed as well. It's like product descriptions. When you start applying personalization, there's multiple versions of the same content. So the impact that that can have is actually huge as well. So this is a project that's sort of ongoing. So some of the numbers that we've kind of pulled out are still kind of TBC, but it's where we've got to the moment. So they actually had 5 dams, which was insane, like 5 different dams, a PIM and then a CMS, so they were on Sitecore XP. So none of them were actually integrated or connected. It was only actually the PIM that was connected to the website. And we found that there was thousands of duplicated assets across all of the different dam systems. And then there's kind of upwards of kind of 1 million and counting sort of digital assets sort of across all of those different platforms. So as I said, we're kind of actively working on this at the moment. So I've just kind of tried to pull out some rough calculations here. But if we say that the average product image for a high resolution image is at least sort of 3.5 megabytes, a lot of the other kind of assets and stuff are a lot higher than that. So I'm trying to kind of just average it out. But 3.5 megabytes times 1 million is, again, almost 2 tonnes of CO2. So 1.89 tonnes of CO2. And that's equivalent to 18 cows or 25 million plastic straws, or kind of driving around the world once in a car as well. So what we're doing is we're migrating them over to Content Hub DAM. And one of the kind of challenges that the client had is they're quite a big organisation. There's multiple different sort of sectors, segments, teams, and everything was kind of quite siloed, which is why obviously they got to a point where they ended up having 5 separate dams. And then another part of it for them as well was the fact of that reusing content. So when we actually started kind of going through and taking stock of everything that we had, their teams highlighted that they could actually reuse a lot of this content. So for example, there was one team that owned one dam, another team that owned another, and they were both kind of creating similar content that could have been used across both teams because they didn't have that visibility and the silos were there, so they couldn't actually kind of see what each other was doing. So with Content Hub DAM, the advanced content modeling capabilities, and it's actually so that'll actually allow them to kind of take stock of the images that they have, and it will help us kind of model them in a meaningful way. And this will also kind of help reduce with that duplicated content and kind of supports content reuse and recycling as well. And then to kind of finish off on this one too, so those are some very sort of specific examples that we've been looking at for a particular client, the one that we're doing the kind of social value and sustainability project. But I think when I've sort of thought about how it could be applied and relevant to some of the sort of other products within the Sitecore DXP, and this isn't something that I've kind of got to a point where I can start to kind of get the calculators for in terms of like infrastructure and cloud. So if anyone on the calls get any experience with this, please hit me up after because I'd love to pick your brain. But thinking about XM Cloud and how that could be applied to kind of helping promote and support sustainability. So it was actually a Google research paper that kind of revealed that moving commonly used software apps to the cloud, we would actually see a decrease in energy usage and electricity needed by 87%. So I think when we think about XM Cloud, the fact that you can kind of host websites globally, but close within the region from an environment perspective, and then as well around the actual kind of resource and consumption of the infrastructure. You cannot only use what you actually need, which I think is something that could be pretty interesting when you think about a move towards a kind of tool like XM Cloud or similar, the kind of benefits that that could have as well. So obviously I'm a Sitecore sort of SME, and these are very specific to kind of Sitecore technologies, but in theory, it could be applied to other technologies as well. So it's not that I'm saying that Sitecore specifically has special powers when it comes to sustainability, but it's just more around how the tech can be kind of used to help support sustainable initiatives, basically. Yep, and then that's me. Thank you so much. And I hope that everyone kind of took some potential like applications that they could kind of start thinking about for your own clients or within your own organisation. And then as well, as I said, that I'm not an expert in this, it's just something that I'm quite passionate about and been doing a lot of kind of self-research, and we're kind of starting to try and think about and incorporate more at Sagittarius. So if anyone else has got any experience kind of using tech, driving sustainability, then I would really love to kind of pick your brain and swap some knowledge here. So yeah, just reach out. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Christine. That was great. Definitely something to think about and be aware of. And next up, we have Colin.
Thanks for having me. The topic for me today will be Content Hub specific user-centric search. So as we go through, a little about me. I'm currently the product platform owner of Sitecore Content Hub for Wolters Kluwer, who is a huge organization, 86 business units, 5 different divisions. We have over 4,000 users in our DAM. From these stats here, 70,000 assets is pretty modest. Our real source of complexity is users, right? And make sure people use what we have to the point that Christine made. A lot of that is being able to reuse things, et cetera. So the topic today will be search. Before this, I was a member of Sitecore's professional services team. So I've worked on over 17 Content Hub projects, from new implementations, upgrades, expansions, really around the requirements gathering, knowledge transfer. And before that, I was at Hedgehog. So I've had the Sitecore experience, partner experience, and now I'm client side. And the topic I'll focus on today really became clear to me when I went client side and started working more directly with end users, right? So we'll get into it a little bit. Okay, we're going to discuss approach, search components, and how to educate and iterate. And I don't apologize, the slides are a little text heavy, but I want to get a lot of information across. So take screenshots, review the video. So trying to make the most of the time here. Okay. So this epiphany I had, I know Jackie, actually one of our organizers, and I, when I was in Sitecore, were banging our head against the wall of how to really explain the benefits of using Content Hub's domain model and organizational structure to both admins, strategists, and ultimately end users, right? So what I found recently with working with users is if I just explain to them that you need to use Content Hub like an e-com site, everyone uses e-com, everyone uses eBay, shopping sites. That's how Content Hub is designed to work, right? That's how it's really designed to be used, whether it's faceting, advanced search, and kind of supplementing that with text search. So automatically, when I started talking to our users, and I came into an existing solution, I did not build ours from the ground up, everyone just goes directly to the search bar, right? A lot of people see that with their websites as well, right? A lot of folks just go directly to the search bar. Google has conditioned us to go there, and we assume it's going to give us everything. With Content Hub, that doesn't always work. It's not as comprehensive, and it's not as specific and as narrow focused as you can get. So we really want folks to use our faceted search, advanced search. And if we start with that as strategists, as requirements gatherers, as implementers, it makes it much easier to use, right? Because it's really hard to tell people to use faceted search when faceted search is not built to work correctly or your metadata is not there. So for folks who are working with clients, working with your own solution, it's really a good kind of thing to come back to and center yourself for. So remind yourself that your marketers are your customers, and finding what they need is the same as a conversion. So I know a lot of partners, strategists have worked a lot more with XP, driving to that form completion, driving to that download, driving to that add to cart button. right? In Content Hub, it's the same mindset. It's the same philosophy of let's get you to where you need to go as efficiently as possible, right? The good thing about Content Hub is your users are internal or with your client, internal to your client, right? So you have that feedback loop you can get. So that's the overarching philosophy. We'll dig in a little bit to how it goes in practice. Also, a lot of people when they switch DAMs, right, are coming from a SharePoint, a Widen, name your DAM of choice, and a lot of those are folder structures. So again, it's typical of people to say, hey, how do I create my own space? How to create a folder? And there are ways to do that, but Content Hub really is driven by metadata, right? Okay. All right, again, text heavy. I'm just going to talk about the bold points to keep this thing moving along. So just like with XP or any customer-facing site, you need to start with your customers. What do my personas need to find? And in Content Hub, what metadata can we apply and expose to get them what they need? So it's not enough just to collect the metadata, right? You have to configure your search components consistently and efficiently across your pages to make sure that users can find what they need. As you can see here, this is from the documentation, but it's very much more similar to what we see for an eBay than a Google or a SharePoint, right? One tip I've found, a few of these are just tips and tricks for folks to use and take with them. One thing that's always a balance is your required fields, right? It adds overhead on asset intake. I know a lot of us are marketers and used to, is the stat when you add an extra field to a form, it reduces completion. I don't know by what percent. You have that trade-off here because with assets in Content Hub, you really need robust metadata to apply facets and effective filtered search. Because only some things are collected out of the box, right? So you really need to make sure that everything that you really need to have, you really want that to be required at some point. Because applying that metadata retroactively is a colossal headache, right? So if we have to go back and edit all 70,000 of our assets because we decide a field, we thought a field was going to be filled out, but it turns out only 5% of those assets had that field applied. We have to clean it up. It's a huge effort. And it's, you're organizing different businesses, different stakeholders, and try to find a way to do it programmatically. It's a lot easier to do it upfront, right? So whether that's at the creation process or at the approval or at the review process, you really need to be adding metadata as you're getting stuff into the system in order to make it useful. A few other tips here. I won't go into all of them, but really it's around the usage of controlled vocabulary as your taxonomies, right? Benefit with Content Hub is you can always use this for security as well. So what's the metadata that's going to be, to use the e-com example, what's your shirt size? What's your color, right? So but that you have to think about that way for assets. And it applies to content and PCM as well if you use those modules. Okay. Search components are absolutely critical for Content Hub, right? These are really what we use to design our pages. So the search experience, the search components really can give you a different feel for each page. But one of the challenges is making that experience consistent, right? It's not enough to just create a really great experience on your main asset search page because Content Hub has lots of other pages, right? So for us, one thing I realized when I was working more closely with our team that manages XP is we were making a lot of changes to our asset search page. I was like, yeah, we're added this filter, added this field, great, it's gonna be all this great stuff. But the problem was it wasn't being applied at the connector, right? The DAM connector to XP is a totally different page you have to configure as well. So when you're making updates, you need to make sure those are happening in the same place. And I have a picture of the search component here, but there's a lot of functionality you can add here, right? You can do a lot of control and a lot of really move the needle as far as finding things for your users just by getting really, really familiar with editing your search components. Trial and error here. So it's relatively low impact. It's not, my developers won't yell at me, I don't think, but it's much easier to make an edit to your search component than it is to say add a field, delete a field, add a facet, create a user group, right? Or excuse me, not add a facet, add a brand new taxonomy. You can kind of go back and forth with your search components. So there's a little bit more wiggle room. We still recommend doing that in a non-prod environment if you have it. And keeping your environments aligned, of course, is a best practice. but your admin should be empowered to make these iterative changes and flip stuff back if it doesn't work, right? So really have to get comfortable editing those. And for folks here who are partners or consulting, when you hand the system over to a client, you have to make sure someone on that team knows what they're doing there. And it's better if it's an admin compared to a developer, right? Because these folks need to be working with the end users, right? They need to have that back and forth channel of communication. So if you have to go run to a developer every time you need to expose a facet, or if you need to change something for advanced search or add a field to your table, it's going to take a lot longer to get those changes live. So your admins of the system, whether it's you, whether it's a client, you really have to be able to be comfortable with those search components. Okay. All right. When I talk about search components, the areas in green are the ones that you really need to focus on and you really can play around with, right? So facets are our filters, query builders, your advanced search, right? So kind of standard stuff there, but be comfortable iterating those, making changes, sorting and output as well. Output is huge. When I got to Wolters Kluwer, I realized we didn't even have the table view enabled, right? And that's all I use because I'm usually looking at multiple pieces of content, right? So it's really hard to do that in a grid view. So make sure you're enabling table view, adding a lot of stuff there, teaching folks how to use it and creating it consistently across those components, right? Inline preview as well, you can pull some levers there as far as findability, exposing different metadata that's really critical to your users. So really get familiar with all of these areas. Don't mess around with filters too much. Don't mess around with selection too much, right? But these ones here are the ones you should be very intimately familiar with, and your clients should be as well. Okay, educate and iterate. This is the biggest part. This is, it's the part probably as a consultant I cared about probably the least, because you have a deliverable, you have an end date to your contract, right? So this is something you really have to empower your clients on doing, right? And helping them understand what to do. So very, very, very common use case. I can't find what I'm looking for. I can't find this asset I uploaded recently. I can't find this asset that's in use on the live site. I can't find, XYZ ABC. For me, the biggest advantage I do, or the biggest thing that works for me, is get on a call to understand. It's very hard to communicate that via email, very difficult to communicate that via Teams chat. Get on a call, have them walk through what they've already tried, what is working, what isn't working. And sometimes they'll figure it out right then. It's like, hey, think critically about this and you can figure it out. It's intuitive. We've built the system to act like an e-com site. You're used to that. So how would you find this, right? And if they still can't find it, then you take over screen share, show them how to find it, and understand if it's something that's an education gap or really a product gap where you have to make a change, right? For example, we realized we couldn't search by modified by. We did not have that included in our advanced search. So, dang it, we need to go back and add that in. We'll have it in there in a week, right? On our next deployment. And then once you iterate, you have to educate again. So channels for release notes, making sure people are aware of the changes you're making. And I always try to do a video recording and get that out there just to make it a little bit easier. A lot of it comes back to these points below, where users should really know how and when to use the different levers within Content Hub search. Facets, advanced search, save selections, etc. They all have their own use. They all have their own time where they're the right tool to use. So it's going in that toolbox and discovering, hey, this is a project my team and I are working on. We want to collaborate on the same group of assets. Okay, cool. That could be a save selection or a collection, depending on the use, right? If it's, I just need to find the same things over and over, okay, that's a save search and you can make that your default search, right? So it's making sure end users understand how to really use this stuff that we spent all this time building. Because it happens with every website, it happens with every platform, is you build these things and the people building them really know how they work and how they're intended to work. And your user who's in there 2-3 times a week for a total of 20 minutes, they get frustrated and aren't going to spend the time to really learn it. So you have to really be proactive with educating, documenting, and getting resources out there so people know how to use this stuff that we spent all this time building, right? It's very frustrating for me at first when folks are like, I can't find this. It's like, click 3 buttons, right? So, you have to tell them what 3 buttons to click. And with that, we go into our touch points. So the ones we use very regularly, we have bi-weekly office hours. So we do them US hours 1 week, EU hours a different week. If we have, those combined with Content Hub and XP, right? So depending on what topics we have, we'll have the same groups available to field questions. So it's an open forum if folks have questions, if someone can bring a use case, and I'll usually open it up with, hey, who can't find something in Content Hub? And usually I'll get a hand, right? Or who's banged their keyboard against their wall today? And usually I'll get a hand, right? So, and I also come with those cases that have come up recently. So if it's something where I've got on a chat or if I've, answered a quick question for somebody, I keep a running list of those. And when I get a group of, 20, 40, 50 people, it's really nice to go through and walk through those. And those, of course, spawn other questions, right? So having that feedback loop is critical. I know a lot of us here are consultants, but having empowering our end users to do that is really, really important. So last one, or 2 things we do: internal comms. We use Yammer, Teams, just to explain, release notes. If we have something helpful, we have a recording out there. We'll shoot it out on our Yammer channel as well. And then we also are tied into GA. I don't use it too heavily. I'm not a huge GA person, but if that's a capability of your team, you can find, obviously GA is an extremely powerful tool. But really just, again, this is all this education is, if you inform your users of using the site like an e-com site rather than a search bar or a file structure, it makes it much easier to kind of get that aha moment and people just generally start using it more correctly. I think that's it. I sped through it. I know we only had 15 minutes, so I tried to keep it brief.
All right. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Michelle Janning.
I'm so grateful to be here, to be in some ways kind of an interloper with Sitecore. I'm an academic and a professional speaker. So I'm grateful to have an audience of folks who do consulting work and who do probably user experience research, product design. And what I'm going to share today about inclusive design, I hope is applicable to some of the projects that you're working on. And if it's not, I think it might be applicable to your everyday lives, because in a lot of ways, we're all designers and thinking about how we might maybe restructure our morning routine or rearrange our workspace at home, or think about how time is organized throughout our workday. So hopefully you'll find some element that's applicable to your work and your life from my kind of 10,000-foot view about inclusive design. A little bit about me. I'm a sociologist and have been doing research and writing for more than 2 decades about mostly how spaces and objects tell the story of human social relationships and roles and inequalities. So I've studied love letters, not what's in them, but what people do with them. I've studied what people put in their briefcases and their desk drawers at work. I've studied family photo albums and kids' bedrooms and spaces in our homes and in our workplaces that show how work and life boundaries are enacted and what they mean. And then more recently, I'm also part of a team of faculty here at Whitman College, which is in Eastern Washington State, who has developed a new academic concentration in human-centered design. So I've also designed a lot of curricular innovation and have used human-centered design as a practice and inclusive design to actually design this particular program. And so if there's time for questions, I'm happy to answer anything about all of those things. But for now, I'm talking about inclusive design. So the question that I often ask when I think about a chair or a space, a classroom, a workspace, an office, a home, or even digital products like smartphones or anything that's on our digital platforms, I wonder what happens if we combine the designed elements of this with people feeling as if they're included. All of us know what it can feel like to feel excluded from a design. All it takes is a website that's poorly designed for us to be like, that's not for me. Or we enter in a space where we feel like, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. The idea of feeling belonging can be really important when we design products, spaces, services, and systems. And I'm invested in that particular project. And we can see this, by the way, in spaces, objects, systems, and activities. And the end result that I hope results from this is that users feel welcome, visible, connected, comfortable, and as if they belong. Where I come into play as a social scientist is in the methodology. In order to create inclusive design, in my opinion, we need to actually have the design process also be inclusive. The design process must be empathetic. And here I borrow a quote from Victor Carey from the National Equity Project, who says, "You need a felt acquaintance of the equity challenge you are confronting. In many cases, you need to put yourself into the system so you can see and feel what is happening." So if we want a design to be inclusive, the design process itself must be inclusive. How do we do this? I have a few ways, and then later I'll talk a little bit about examples where this can be seen. First, the what. We need to ask people who ultimately will use or participate in the design to help us define the problem that the design is trying to solve. We can't just think of this in our own heads. Sometimes our past experience can help, but often the what is part of our process of engaging with stakeholders to see what the actual issue is. How? Well, we learned that maybe email is not the best answer from Christine and Colin, and maybe there are other methods to use for gathering input or seeing how people are doing or figuring out our users' needs being met. So gathering and analyzing the right kind of information, the right kind of data, and in the right way is really crucial. I call that the how. Including the right people matters, the who. I think we often take for granted that we know who should be included in any design process, which stakeholders there are. I like to say that we should take a step back and ask ourselves, are we sure? Are we sure we have the right people and all of the right people involved here, either directly or indirectly? And finally, where and when actually matter. I study spaces, objects, and time. So if we pay attention to location and how time matters during the input process, we'll actually have a better design as a result. So in other words, inclusive design processes involve good people research. I want to tell you a little bit about why I got interested in this. As I've said, I've done a lot of sociological research and writing for a couple decades. And at one point, a few years ago, I was asked by a former student of mine who's an architect in Texas to come and consult with her nonprofit crew of folks who were entering phase 2 of a community build of tiny houses for individuals who had lost their homes and who also had mental health issues. They wanted to find out if the first phase worked, and they wanted to engage the users in this particular process of feedback gathering in ways that honored their experiences, that were ethical and empathetic, but it was such a precarious population. They wanted to make sure they were doing it well. They called me in and asked me for my advice about what I would call the choreography of the interviews that they ended up doing with the individuals who resided in this particular community. They gathered the data, they moved to phase 2, and they used some of the ideas that I shared with them, and actually had a lot of great ideas of their own because they lived in Austin and they had been part of the project since the get-go. Anyway, I was inspired by the fact that an architecture firm or a gathering of architects who were working on this project were interested in a social scientist's view about how to gather good input from the right stakeholders. So I started thinking about ways that my expertise might be useful, and it resulted in the publication of a book, A Guide to Socially Informed Research for Architects and Designers. But I will tell you, it doesn't have to be just for architects and designers. The way I talk about socially informed research is applicable to UX product design. It's applicable to our own everyday lives and communities. It's a step-by-step guide for architects, designers, and builders, and maybe you, to incorporate effective people research into socially informed design processes. So the goal I have is to engage with people who will ultimately use the design in the process itself. This is nothing new for folks on this call, but to do it in an organized and ethical way. And that will then yield inclusive and socially sustainable designs that are based on sound and rigorous input gathering techniques. The last half of my chat here, I'm going to give you 4 examples of designs where I illustrate the steps that I think are important for inclusive design: a building, a website, a curriculum, and a workshop. And you can insert your own design projects here as well. So first, the what. Remember, we have to figure out what exactly we're trying to solve or create. What is the issue? What is the problem? Here I share a story about a building project that I was involved in that was actually a college residence hall. And the goal, or the design project, was to design a residence hall that meets current and future student needs. We weren't sure what problem we were trying to solve, other than the fact that we needed a new building. And we had some past data that showed us that students, especially in their second year at a residential college that was a 4-year college, started to feel a little disconnected from community because the residence halls were on the periphery of the geography of campus. And so we decided to figure out, well, what does building a residence hall do for these students? What revisions do we want to offer the definition of problem during the design process? In this process, this multi-week gathering of various stakeholders, including, of course, the architects and designers, we learned that what really mattered was the establishment of community for these second-year students. We ended up coming up with the motto of see and be seen. How do you create a space where you not only can see people when you enter quite visibly, but you actually are also seen by people? And so you feel as if you belong, if you see people, and you also are seen by people. So the building entrance was designed, and this is what the picture is here, as a way to establish community through that choreography of entering and exiting by being visible and making other people visible to you. So that's the what. We used the process and the design to figure out what it is that we were actually trying to solve. The end result was an entryway to a dormitory that met the goal, or is meeting the goal, of see and be seen. The how. Are we sure we're gathering the right input and gathering it in the right way? Here I talk about a website project I was part of. I live in Walla Walla, Washington, which is on the eastern side of Washington State, and was involved and consulted with the Walla Walla Valley Early Learning Coalition. And what they wanted to do was redesign a website to make data about children, local children's experiences, easy to access and understand for a really diverse group of stakeholders: parents, childcare providers, and policymakers, really different audiences. In this process of developing the website, and by the way, this started in the spring of 2020, so we also had an interruption due to COVID-19 and had to revise our data gathering in all sorts of ways, as all of us have done, to think about how best to gather input from people who may engage with this website. But we asked, how should we collect and analyze input about people's use and understanding of web-based data about children? How do we know if we have the right kind and amount of data? And it was in this process that we began work by identifying key stakeholders, running some ideas by people. We used surveys, we used interviews, we used observation, we used piloting of website things. We talked with, of course, graphic designers to think about user interfaces on the website, especially in terms of accessibility. And we also talked to people in the community about what image of Walla Walla is needing to be portrayed by this particular organization. The multi-method approach allowed us to feel pretty confident about the usability of the website, especially since we had talked to parents, caregivers, and policymakers, along with nonprofit leaders, governmental agents, and people who were in charge of the aesthetic representation. So we felt pretty good about how we gathered input. Who are the stakeholders? And here I have kind of a funny story. This goes back to my involvement at Whitman College in the creation of a new program in human-centered design. And in the process of figuring out who should be involved, we had as our main goal to design and name an innovative college curricular program based on feedback from a variety of stakeholders. And we went through the process. This began a couple years ago, and it was a lot of faculty and staff, those of us who are always at the front of the room and always feel like we're the smartest people in the room. And we thought, we surely know how to create a good curriculum for our students. And it didn't occur to us till several months in that maybe we ought to talk to the students. And so one of the things that I was very happy to lead was gathering students of mine, sociology and anthropology students, to facilitate focus group conversations with existing students about how they saw a program like this needing to unfold, what it should be called, whose needs should be met, what it should look like, what values and principles should guide the creation of this, how it might fit into a liberal arts model of education, which is what Whitman College is. So from whom should we collect and analyze input about people's goals and wishes for a new program? Who are the stakeholders? It occurred to us, thankfully not too late, to involve the students. Fast forward to this past fall, we reconnected with students in many different ways and gathered more input and made an FAQ of student input for questions that had come up about how the program might be designed, shared that with my faculty colleagues who then voted and approved the program almost unanimously. So we were happy that we got the right stakeholders in that project. And last but not least, the where and when. And this is where my research on spaces and time, I think, become really interesting. When people give you input for product design, for anything in your life, where they are, like physically and geographically matters, and when it occurs matters. Here I talk about a workshop I developed, a tool actually I used to help people self-assess how much they separate or integrate their home and paid work lives, of interest to probably some of you who might be sitting at home right now, perhaps wondering how the boundaries may or may not be operating. This is based on a lot of interview data that I've done over the years, where I realized that asking people about whether they put a picture of their child in their workspace, that's the image on the top, or whether they add their children's drawings on the walls of their law firm office, that's the picture on the bottom, are something that matter to them, are allowed by their workplace, that show them that they either integrate or segment their work and family lives in ways that are helpful for them or difficult, how much discretion they have over time and space. What I want to say here is when we gather input from people with anything that we design, thinking about issues like privacy, where people are and whether they feel like they can actually tell you what they think. Is their supervisor kind of looming in the corner? Is there a room they can go to that's private? Do they have external things going on? Is it a time of day when they actually can concentrate? These things matter as well. So to recap, doing inclusive design, the why, you have to be motivated by whatever values kind of guide what you're talking about. I shared mine. What, how, who, where, and when is how I'm framing this. And of course, sometimes things don't always go right. Sometimes we don't have enough resources. We sometimes exclude people or animals. Sometimes people don't know what they want. We have all been in that situation and we get it wrong. So we iterate, we keep track of what worked, and we do our best to balance our own expertise with empathy for others. And I hope the takeaways are clear that socially sustainable design requires inclusive methods to gather input during the design process. You're a designer and design is everywhere. And I'm happy to take questions if people have them. Thank you. And my contact info is there as well.
So thank you, Michelle, and also Christine and Colleen for all the presentation. Krista needed to drop off. I'm here to manage questions. If someone has, please raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask your question. Okay, no questions so far. As also Krista mentioned, you can always contact the speakers and also contact smac@sitecore.com, and we are happy to forward your email to the speakers and also get you the answer. So as I don't see any questions coming in, thank you again for all the presenters today, and also thank you for attending this webinar. We will publish this webinar in a couple of days on our YouTube channel, so you can share that with others. I really learned a lot today, and I think these topics are really good to be discussed. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.